Hello out there in YouTube land. We are going to get started here in just a moment. Okay, we are about 1 minute out from starting the Saturday morning symposium. Welcome. I am John, and I am here to answer your composition questions. So if you are out there and you've got a good question, just go ahead and start watching, and you can start typing in the chat, and hopefully I'll get to them. And I thought we'd start off with something that's a little bit different. I have been practicing my jazz recently, and I was like, why don't I just start off with some music that I recorded? So this is me on trumpet in Band in a Box, which actually is a really great program, which we'll probably end up talking a little bit about. What's really cool about Band in a Box is it'll create the background for you, and it sounds really good. They use this thing called Real Style now. Oh, hold on, I'm muted. There we go. Hopefully you can hear this. That's me on trumpet. Now, I warn you, I make mistakes. Okay, thanks. I'm going to try to fix the mic. Test, test. Maybe that's a bit too loud. So test, test for 1, 2. Let me know if the mic's sounding better. Yes, I'm eating the mic right now. Okay, that's just a taste. I like playing jazz, and what's really good about what I just showed you, not so much the playing, but I transcribed all that by ear. So that's a tune called On the Sunny Side of the Street, and I was going off of an album from Dizzy Gillespie called Sunny Side Up, which has Sonny Rollins and Sonny Stitt on it as well, which I assume is why the name. And the tune, Sunny Side of the Street. Nonetheless, ear training. Ear training is important for everybody, and it doesn't have to be a huge deal. It could be as simple as I'm going to pick a tune that I like, and I'm going to learn to play the melody on the trumpet. I didn't actually write anything out other than the chords. Obviously, I wrote in Band in a Box, but I didn't write any of the melody out, and I'm working on transcribing the solos as well, try to memorize them. It's just a great exercise. It gets you connected to the music in a very tactile way, kind of deep down inside. Your ears get better, your sense of relative pitch gets better, and your sense of harmonic motion and everything gets a lot better. So something I recommend, go out there, start doing some stuff by ear, even if it's just basic plinking around on the piano to try to figure out a melody. You got to start somewhere, and I attribute a lot of my ability with music, a lot of my talent in quotes, to really my ear training when I was younger. I would sit and I'd try to write out melodies. And I remember specifically there was a melody from Michael Giacchino from the Jurassic Park Lost World video game, which was one of the first games that had a real orchestra on PlayStation. And I wanted to learn how to play the melody. It's kind of like the big melody, I think, when you're escaping the T-Rex at the end of the game. So I just sat with my trumpet. I figured out how to play it. And that was one of the first things I ever transcribed by ear. And from that point on, I did quite a bit of that when I was younger. And then the internet came about, and you could get everything very easily. You get transcribed solos, you could get scores, you could get whatever you want. And I ended up abandoning a little bit of that, and I think I hurt my development by not doing this more. So I'm picking it up more. I'm trying to play a little bit. But with all that being said, let me get to some questions. Also, let me know. I've been trying to think about, what is a good. I guess I want to kind of think about these symposiums more like a show. And I've been trying to think about, what would make it a little bit more interesting. Obviously, I think if we listen to some music, it's kind of fun. Maybe start to bring on some guests within reason. I want to start slow and just add things little bit by little bit. But if you guys out there have ideas for the show, let me know. Shoot me an email, or we can talk about it in the chat. But probably email for this is a little bit better. Okay, so I'm going to get on to the questions here. This is from Guitar Favorite Instrument, which is your screen name. What is the best way to develop a theme? Well, it depends on the kind of development that you're talking about. Are you talking about refining the melody in the sense of you've got a basic idea, and or not a basic idea? Let me rephrase that, because a basic idea has a very specific definition. You've got a simple idea, right? You've got something, Well, if you're talking about turning that into something more, then really what you're talking about is ornamentation and refining your theme or your melody. And that is covered in my 101 course. There's a bunch of things, non-chord tones, like passing tones and neighbor tones. You've got things like turns, that kind of stuff. You can arpeggiate. Let me do that a little higher. There's appoggiaturas, which is a leap to a non-chord tone. Trying to think off the top of my head. I wrote them all down because sometimes I don't remember them all. but those are kind of the main ones that I go for first. Oh, and then obviously a big one is rhythmic. So, right, adding new rhythms, dividing your notes up in different ways. That's a great way to develop it. Now, the other type of development is developing, like lengthwise, taking an initial idea that you have and turning it into something longer and more substantial. So, and that's what's covered in my 201 course, where we go over sonata form. And effectively, the way to do that is you start with a tight-knit theme, right? A kind of a normative 8-measure theme, maybe a sentence, maybe a period, or a hybrid theme, which is usually a mix of a sentence and a period in different ways. And then you use things called loosening techniques. So there's a couple like core loosening techniques that we use. They're obviously within your theme, depending on the kind of theme you're doing, you've already got repetitions, right? So if that's your basic idea, right? Very simple, we're just sticking on tonic the whole time. You've got exact repetition where you repeat the harmonic material. So you could actually change the melody a little bit. You could change the chord tone that you start on. Or you could do like a very exact repetition, which I call a literal repetition. And then you'll have some kind of development within it if it's like a sentence, Something like that. Sometimes it's hard to improvise these things. I'm not the greatest in the moment classical improviser, so Beethoven would wipe the floor with me on that one. But what you can do then is use these loosening techniques. So you've got things like extension. So an extension is think of it as like if this is one element, right? It's a 2-measure basic idea. and we repeated that. Let's say we do a kind of like a call and response repetition where we're doing, or a statement response repetition where we're repeating it now on the 5. If we wanted to add another repetition of the basic idea, we can do that as well. Before we get into the continuation phrase. Where we kind of develop things a little bit more over the next 4 measures. So that's called extension. An extension is basically a kind of self-contained unit that you add on. So you've got a 2-measure basic idea. You have that repetition. The extension would be a further repetition, one more repetition. And it's not just that way of doing it. I mean, you can do extensions off of entire themes. You can, you usually do extensions. I normally think of extensions happening on the phrase level. So the presentation phrase, usually you'll add, another 2 measures to it, or another, repetition of the entire presentation phrase. Then there's expansion. Expansion happens within the formal element. So if it's a basic idea, if that's what we've got, you could have we've kind of lengthened that. So that was lengthening kind of within augmentation of the melody a little bit. I kind of stretched out the melody, but I could do it a different way. I could just start adding more notes. Rhetorically, it generally means the same thing as the basic idea meant, if you can say that. I mean, obviously, meaning in music is different from meaning in other, like in text and everything like that. But it generally feels kind of the same, but just a little bit longer. We're just expanding those ideas out a little bit more. Now, there's another one called interpolation. And interpolation, it's closer to extension, where you're adding on an additional formal element, but it's usually unrelated to what's come before it. So if we've got this, instead of repeating it with, we would do something like this. That's an interpolation, and this wasn't really connected with the original idea. It's kind of out of nowhere, it feels like it's just plopped onto things. Those 3 techniques, extension, expansion, and interpolation, are very powerful. Now, there's additional loosening techniques, which really you have to have a good grasp over form. Things like, fusion, the fusing of 2 formal elements, the functions of 2 formal elements. So a big example is continuation and cadential functions get merged into one expanded cadential progression in a continuation. So if you only have, if you've got something like this as your cadence, now your whole continuation phrase would be it becomes a much longer, it takes up the entire phrase. That's fusion. You have asymmetrical grouping, which generally is a byproduct of other types of things. So interpolation, expansion, or extension. Asymmetrical grouping means you may have a 3-measure phrase and you may have a 4-measure phrase, or you may have a 6-measure phrase and a normal 4-measure phrase. They're asymmetrically grouped together, whereas normally they're symmetrical. So those are some of the core ways of developing it. Now, once you get beyond that into larger formal sections, things like the exposition, the development, and the recapitulation of sonata form, you have a lot more tools at your disposal. So obviously, you've got your main themes. You have transitions. Transitions allow you to develop your material. A great technique is called model sequence technique, where you take a model and then you sequence off of it, and you, at the same time, generally you fragment that. So you will cut it up. So if you've got an 8-measure model, right, then you can repeat that in a different key, but only use 4 measures. And then you repeat that in a different key, but maybe you use 2 measures, and you repeat it a couple times at 2 measures. And you'll see that this is done all the time in development sections. Very powerful technique. And you don't really have to justify what tonal areas you go to. In the sonata form course, we look at Beethoven Piano Sonata number 1, movement 1. He basically does this like stair step thing where he starts in A flat major, then he goes to B flat minor, C minor, B flat minor, and then basically ends up making his way back to F minor for the recapitulation. Hopefully that answers your question. That's a good question. Development is always something that I think is tricky for people, and it's one of these things too that you just have to practice. You've got to practice it like everything else. It's not the most intuitive thing to start with. So let's see. Move on to another question here. Let's see. If you're composing a commission, how do you know how much money to charge people? And this was from Andrew Munoz. There's no Inye there, so I'm going to say Munoz, but I don't know. Maybe you just read it that way. So charging what you're worth is always a difficult thing to do. And I see everybody saying good morning, hello, Michael, David, everybody, I Kel, everybody on there. Sorry if I didn't say my hellos. Back to the question, charging is always a tricky thing because you're caught between this world of, everybody's saying that composers are devaluing themselves and they're willing to work for free, especially in the film composing world. But a lot of it comes down to what kind of experience do you have? What is it for? Is this going to be something that a lot of people are going to potentially see? What kind of element are you composing for? How comfortable, how much work are you going to have to do? You have to factor all of these in because it is, it is risky in some sense. It's a negotiation, and when you put yourself out there, you say, I'm going to charge this amount, you effectively say, that's it. I'm setting my price. So if you go too low, then you're saying, I'm not worth very much. If you go too high, you're likely not going to get the job, or they're not going to call you back. So with all that being said, I would say there's not a standard rate. A lot of it is situation dependent on the job that you're doing. And I've heard a couple good ways to approach it mentally before you jump right in. So first, I would get into the numbers, right? Get into the numbers very clearly in terms of how much do you earn right now in your day job or whatever you do. Now, if you're a high school student, a college student, it could be zero, right? You may be 15 years old and you're not earning anything. So that's important because you don't have to survive necessarily off of these commissions. Whereas if you're like me and you're 32 years old and you've got 3 kids and a wife and you've got basically a family to take care of, I can't just be going chasing dreams all day. I have to start earning money. Then I would look at how long does it take you to actually do the work. And I would test yourself at whatever the style of music is, whatever the type of job it is. I would sit down one day and actually say, okay, I'm going to put all my effort as if this was the real deal. And I'm going to see how many minutes of music I can finish in a single day that are like really well finished, polished music. Now, if this is for a live performance for classical players, that's going to mean probably, at least a finished score or a generally finished score. I mean, doing your parts always takes a long time. I'm saying really getting to the end of the kind of musical logic. If you're doing a film score, that could be a very polished, completed mock-up. So kind of the rule of thumb that I use and a lot of people use in Hollywood is 2 minutes of finished music a day. And that's very doable if you generally have your skills in order and you know what you're going for. So now you can start to think about, okay, what's the total amount of music I have to write for this commission? Do I have to write 10 minutes of music? Is this a short film, right? I kind of look at it as most short films, I end up doing about 50 to 75% music over the film. So if you've got a 10-minute film, you're looking 5 to 7 minutes, which means you're looking at, anywhere from, 3 to 5 days of nonstop, very focused composing, which means that you're taking a week out of your schedule to get that done. Now, if you're a high school student, college student, or you've just got a situation where you don't need to earn money, that means that you can go for a lower price to get the job if that's what's most important to you at that time. I'm not going to say don't do work for free. I'm not going to say don't do work for cheap, because everybody is in a weird position in life, a different position in life. And, for some people, it is the right thing to do to take a job for free. I've taken plenty of short films for free because, one, I knew that they didn't have any money to pay me. And two, it was about building the relationship. It was about building my skills. It was about, learning the craft of composition, not just getting work. Or if these directors that I met in UCLA said, "Hey, I want you to score my film," I said, "Okay, that'll be $2,000. I would have never worked with them, because ultimately they didn't have that kind of money to use on a composer, especially when they've got to rent equipment, they've got to get a location. Most of the other people are also UCLA students, so just about everybody was doing it for free, including the director. The director wasn't making any money off of this. Most of the directors were not making any money. They're doing these for their class assignments. Now, other jobs I've done where it may be 1 or 2 minutes of music, but it's a commercial or something like that, then yeah, I'm going to charge some money for that. And depending on the complexity, I may charge more or less, because at this point, I don't need those little things. I've started to establish myself with the people I want to establish, and I know what I'm going after. And I can say, yeah, I'm gonna do this work for a price, and if I lose the job because of the money I asked for, so be it. That's not a big deal. They say it should either be good for your wallet, it should be good for your career, or it should be good for your soul. And if you can put the job into one of those three categories, probably do it. If somebody comes along and says, "Hey, we need you to do something, and we have no money for it, but you really like the project," do the project, because it's going to be good for your career. It's going to be good for your soul, right? Now, if you don't like the project that much, it's okay maybe then, but they're saying we're going to give you $1,000, take it if that's your price, whatever. But it's a very personal question, setting your price, and I'm sorry I don't have a definitive answer, like you need to charge, $50 per minute of music or $500 per minute of music. It's just a very personal question. You got to really look at what are your capabilities, your skills, what does your name demand among other people? Everyone's like, "Ooh, wow, that's, this is Andrew. He really knows his stuff." Like, for instance, John Williams can ask for $1 million for a score, whereas John Brantingham cannot ask for $1 million. I could write the exact same amount of music, but it just doesn't carry the weight that his name carries and his capabilities carry. So that's just something to keep in mind. Where are you at? What's the job for? What are all the specifics? How much money do you actually need to live on? Where are you getting that money from? And is it good for your wallet? Is it good for your career? Or is it good for your soul? That's about all I know about all that stuff. But it should point you in the right direction. Okay, let's see. Question. Apart from finding key signatures, are there any unusual ways to use the circle of fifths? Well, using the circle of fifths is what it is. It's kind of like the circle of fifths as a progression is everywhere, right? It's 2 5s, 2 5 1, right? Or let's see, I'll do it. Right, so yeah, as a modulatory thing, it's really great because the circle of fifths goes through every key. So that's a great way for you to modulate and find those shared keys. In terms of how else to use the circle of fifths, I mean, it's and these are actually fourths here. Those are fifths. For ear training, it's a good way to get your head wrapped around how things are related. I mean, if you look, every key next to each other is a closely related key. So you got C on one side, you got F on the other side, you got G. Those are both single accidental keys. So you can understand a little bit about the relations, what a closely related key is, right? And by proxy, now you can look at the minor stuff and you can say, well, D minor, because it's the relative key to F major, is also closely related because it's one flat, right? And then E minor, also closely related because it's one sharp. So it's an easy way to quickly find out where's a easy way to modulate to. You know if it's closely related, it's going to share at least one or a couple chords, right? Another thing that I've used the circle of fifths for, I mean, in terms of not so much composition, but practicing. If I'm practicing trumpet, I may go through keys. It gives you kind of a structure to do that instead of chromatically. So that's another way to look at it. But compositionally, I mean, I would really just look at it as another tool in your tool belt. If you've got the circle of fifths memorized, you can always use that as a sequence to go down. So hopefully that helps. I mean, these kind of tools like the circle of fifths, they're just tools. They're not the end-all be-all of everything. I mean, you can look at things in minor third relations, and it's not going through every different key, but it's going through 4 different keys, and it equally divides the octave. So there's a whole bunch of stuff to go over. Right? Same with the augmented fourth equally divides the octave. And then major thirds equally divide the octave. So it's just different ways to be looking at things and to start formulating, tools for you to work on stuff. But a lot of it is, what it is that you want to get out of it. I think something like the circle of fifths, it doesn't tell you much about what music is really doing other than some common chordal movements. So I wouldn't get too wrapped around it other than just for practicing some ideas out. So let's see. What do you think about this? Everything in music is a major note structure. It's just different ways of emphasizing that. This is from Iceman. I don't quite understand what you're saying is a major note structure. We have major and minor. I don't quite understand exactly what you're asking here. There's a lot of ways to cut this up. And ultimately, you can think about your music diatonically, right? You can think about that same thing in how many half steps and think about it in set theory, Still the same thing, no matter how you're looking at it. You can think about it in major note structures or however you're thinking about it. As long as you can come up with a system that somewhat makes sense to itself, then you can get a lot of out of that. And actually, I think there's benefit in coming up with quirky theories of music that maybe don't have total explanatory power over everything, but they've got some explanatory power. And what they do is they push you in weird directions. So, if everything is a major note structure, whatever that really means, see what that leads to in terms of, does that lead to other weird types of keys, other weird types of melodic structures? There's a system of composition, if you've been on the VI control forum, called EIS, and EIS is the equal interval system. And it's a little bit mysterious the way everybody talks about it, because effectively the guy who created it wanted it to be passed down from teacher to student and not just create a book and leave it out there for people to not quite understand. But it's the same kind of music. If you listen to the music that they're composing same kind of tonal music. It's just a different way of thinking about it, and it may be a way of thinking about it that makes certain kinds of composition a lot easier and other kinds of composition slightly more difficult. It's just like partimenti and musical schema. If you want to sound like a gallant classical composer like Mozart, then let's see. You memorize these partimenti, you're going to have the tools to compose like they composed. And in fact, a lot of the ideas that we have about harmonic movement things, they weren't really codified like they are today back then. So you may sound more like they do than if you were to learn everything how it is taught today exactly the way it's taught. It's just a different way of thinking about music, and that's what all these systems are. They're just different ways of conceptualizing the same kind of thing. It's hard to sometimes put into words what is music, right? It's one of these things that's like, really, when you get down to it, it could be a lot of different things. But for me, it's almost like a properly basic belief, like, who am I, right? I know who I am, even if I can't necessarily describe that in words to anybody. I don't have to make a giant leap. And I know we could go down some very weird philosophical roads here about, thinking and consciousness and me as a person. However, I am who I am, and I think therefore I am, right? I know properly, basically, that I exist, and nobody has to convince me of that. And I think music a lot of times is that way for a lot of people. You don't know necessarily how to describe it, but you know it when you see it and when you hear it. You know what music is. So all these things are just different ways of describing music. And if you approach it like that, you become a lot less defensive about your system, your style, your technique, your way of writing, chord analysis, and your way of creating melodies. And you become a lot more open to, hey, maybe they've got a different idea that's really useful, or maybe that composer over there. So yeah, let me see. You added a comment down here. Let me see. Like underlying minor note, a major root, 2 whole steps down. Iceman, I kind of see what you're saying with, trying to figure out the minor root has a major root, 2 whole steps down. Just whatever works for you, but I generally say if you can keep it simpler, then keep it simpler. If it's a minor chord, you could say that it's a major 7th chord with a missing root, right? That's what you hear about the half diminished chord is really just a 9th chord, right? And often it's used as a 9th chord. Here, this one's for you, Kel. Kel asks if I'm going to drink the coffee. Maybe it's bothering him that I was picking it up and not actually taking a sip because I had to talk. But hopefully we kind of answer that question. Whatever helps you to conceptualize the music, stick with that. Use it, right? But don't be dogmatic about it. Be open to other ideas as well. Let's see. David White commented back here. This was when we were talking about charging. In the medical field, they suggest 90% of the highest rate. Well, 90% of the highest rate, you got to pick your field. What is the highest rate for somebody who's a comparable composer to me versus what's the highest rate, overall for composers? I mean, like I said, there's some composers who get hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars to do a score, right? If I do 90% of that, I'm not going to get any work. Maybe I'll luck out. I'll get one score for 1.9 million or 1.8 million, but otherwise, I will see. I just think it's one of those things. Set your price carefully. And I would err on the side of high, because unless, like I said, you're taking work for just getting it in, just doing the work and having a lot of fun, then you might as well err on the high side, because you're setting your price. So if you think that you're worth $500 for a 10-minute short film, maybe go with $700, or maybe quote $1,000. And if they come back, they say, I'm sorry, I just don't have that money. Be like, okay, well, thank you. You put your price out there. You learned a lesson. You didn't get the job. There's going to be more jobs. If you're really after it, there's more work out there. So you can get it. You just got to go after it. Okay, Buncat Bo asks, I have a piece where I know what I want. I have the form, genre, feeling, and such, but I can't get anything out that doesn't sound like a piece I have been listening to. How do I get on? Well, I would recommend writing out everything and just continuing, even if you feel that it sounds like something you've been listening to. And the reason is because maybe you have to just get it out of your system, right? I would say that it's probably not going to make a big difference just going and listening to something else. That's probably not going to get it out. You may just have to write it and get it out of your system, but this is the thing. You can always come back and change it. So there are probably some characteristic things about the piece that you've been listening to that seems to be peeking out. And if you can identify the same characteristic elements in your piece, change them. Go back and intellectually, say, how can I make this still work without ending up doing, without ruining what I've already done, And you may have to recompose a significant portion of it. If you've got, a 12 measure theme, you may have to rewrite 6 or 7 measures of it to make it all, smooth it all out. But then you end up breaking that chain, and now you've got your own music. But I wouldn't necessarily say this is a bad thing, because one, you got to remember we're all developing, and there is a lot of benefit in copying masters, right? So you can look at it like, I can't get this out of my head, it's really frustrating. Or you could say, you know what, I'm going to just jump on this, I'm going to make everything that I can out of this. It's a piece that you're probably really into, that's why you've been listening to it. Maybe it's time to analyze it and model it. And make it specifically a piece that tries to sound like that. Nobody needs to know you ever wrote it. You don't need to publish it. You don't need to take, amazing credit for how much of a genius you are. But you can turn around and say, what can I abstract from this that I can then carry forward into other pieces? Things like finding, this is how this person likes to split up his idea, when they fragment the idea. Or maybe you notice like, oh, here's a really cool way of using the circle of fifths, to bring it back to the question a little bit earlier. So don't be afraid necessarily of emulating great composers. One of the things I've been reading about a little bit, just because I'm getting kind of back into jazz, I'm going to end up playing like coffee shops here is my goal, just for fun. But I got this book called Thinking in Jazz, which is a really cool book. It's by this guy, Paul Berliner. And he just went around and interviewed a bunch of jazz musicians and said, how did you develop? Where did you get your things from? And for the most part, all of them hung around other great jazz players, and they would copy them. They would transcribe their solos. They would practice their solos. They would practice licks in all 12 keys that those players did. And then they would end up probably writing music based off of the chord progressions that they had. You look around at jazz, you've got a bunch of standards, but then you've got a bunch of bebop tunes that are basically the same chord progressions as a lot of standards with just a different melody. Ultimately, you get into this imitate, assimilate, innovate, process where you first you learn something, you make it your own, and then you can modify, innovate it, but then you're doing it in a natural way, the way languages and the way customs, musical customs really develop, which is kind of evolutionary and not necessarily revolutionary. I think a lot of these revolutionary systems, like serialism, while they've got a lot of potential, also sometimes need to be reined in and say, did we make it one step too far? And in trying to revolutionize music too much. And as a composer individually, you can probably say the same thing to yourself. Am I taking this one step too far? And should I tone it back and say, you know what? I need to give respect to the composers that came before me and try to learn from them first before I turn around and say, I'm sounding too much like them. I need to be 100% original. Okay, so let's see. Question. This is from Charles M. Stutz. I apologize if I mess up names here. In first inversion, can the root of the chord be 2 octaves higher instead of just 1? So inversions are like, almost like kind of, think of them as the minimum that you would need interval-wise above the bass note. So if you've got, let me pull up Sibelius here so you can see this. If you've got C and this is in root position, first inversion is this and second inversion is this. That's kind of like the basic way of thinking about these inversions. However, nothing stops it from being like this. You know. These are all the same thing. These all mean the same thing. I didn't change the inversion because what the inversion's really referring to is the bass. Now, there are ways to think about doublings and think about the spread. And in the book that I read recently, Voice Leading by David Huron, which if you're into this stuff is an amazing book, what he basically lays out. Now, we've got a way of saying this about chord spacing by saying that we should model the... sorry, let me get this written out here. Something like that. That we should effectively model the overtone series, right, in terms of chord spacings. And if you look, the lower part of the overtone series, C to C, you got this octave, right? And then you add the fifth right here. Then you add another octave. The third, fifth again, octave, ninth, sharp 4, seventh. And this maybe happens way up there. I can't remember once you get up there. But what that means is that you just want a bigger spread on bottom and a smaller spread on top. And it's actually an auditory principle. So the way notes are spread out on your whatever it's called, the little cochlea, the basal membrane or whatever it's called. I can't remember all the terms. But the little snail-looking thing, I think it's the cochlea in your ear, it's got little hairs in it that actually are excited by different frequencies. And the lower frequencies actually have a larger space between them on your cochlea than the higher frequencies are actually closer together on your cochlea. And that explains why when you have that, it's an interesting sound, right? And yeah, sure, Beethoven maybe would use this for this color, right? But it's not nearly as clear as... And it's because your ears are actually able to differentiate those tones better in your ear because the spaces between the hairs are closer. It can get finer detail the higher up you go to a certain point. And then at a certain point, you start losing touch, once you get up. Up there, it's not all that important. So the point of all this is that, yeah, your inversion is really your bass note. You're thinking about your chord spread. The lower you go, just keep your spreads bigger. The higher you go, you can keep them closer together. It's going to sound clean. So let me find another question here. Let's see. I'm new to writing orchestral pieces and having trouble understanding how chord progression and how to use them properly in advice. So this is Apollo. And yes, Apollo, I have advice for you. So if you are still working out how chord progressions work, I would stay away from writing for orchestra right now. Because when you add extra instruments, it just adds extra difficulty and complication for writing. You not only have to think about all those individual parts, but you also have to think about the stamina of the players, what is characteristic writing for those players, how does the balance work? If you've got a trumpet and a flute, you're going to have a lot of trouble trying to balance those two instruments together. And then you add that, you've got 20, 30 instruments in an orchestra. You're going to have a lot of trouble if you're also trying to figure out just the basics of chord progressions and melodies, things like that. So I would highly recommend taking a step back from orchestration and really looking at just the kind of the core musical logic and musical grammar right now, which I'll take a second here to say, if you want to learn that, I would definitely go to my website, read through my Start Here page, How to Compose Music 101, sign up for the free course, go through the free course. I do explain basically most of the basics in that free course. And then if you're really interested, sign up for the 101 course because it's very in-depth. It goes over a lot of information. And you'll understand how these chord progressions work, how they all come together, and you'll have a very solid foundation for learning how to orchestrate. And I am working on my orchestration course. Another little thing that's come out, which I haven't officially told everybody right now, but it is live up on my site, is my interview with Samuel Adler. So it's the latest episode of the podcast. I realize I haven't been doing a lot on the podcast. I want to change that a little bit. And it's available. It's live. There was an issue with my feed, and my podcast is down right now on iTunes, and I'm working with iTunes to get that back up. I fixed the feed now. However, you can still listen to it on Stitcher, and you can still listen to it directly on my website. So I would check out the podcast. In fact, I'll post a link to it right now. So yeah, check out the podcast because it's an interview with Samuel Adler, who wrote kind of the preeminent book on orchestration. So it's just interesting listening, getting in his mind, and talking to him about these things, about foreground, middle ground, and background, his process for composing, his thoughts on orchestration. He said something very interesting to me. He said orchestration is a second composition of the same piece. You're composing again. And I love that. It's a way of conceptualizing it that takes a lot of pressure off. We hear these ideas that and if you're using something other than the Apple podcast software, you can actually just enter my feed. A lot of times you can add an RSS feed, just the URL to the feed, and copy and paste that. So if you just go to artofcomposing.com/podcast. That is actually the address for the feed. You can copy that and paste that into a podcast player, and often that'll work. So you can get it back. And like I said, it should be back up on iTunes pretty soon. So check it out. But what I was going to say was we hear these ideas. Rimsky-Korsakov said that a great composer will think of the orchestration at the same time they're composing. And in a sense, yeah, you want to always be kind of thinking about, who am I writing this line for? But that's not to say that you have to absolutely understand how you're going to orchestrate before you compose. And the evidence is very clear, not so much from what I've seen from Rimsky-Korsakov, because I haven't seen a lot of his sketches, but with his greatest student, Stravinsky, who's considered a master of orchestration, one of the greatest orchestrators of all time. You can look at his sketches. You can see that often he doesn't write out the orchestration. And sometimes when he does, he changes the orchestration. So that's important to keep in mind, is that, we put these people on a pedestal about how they do things, about what they've said, what they do. And often they're wrong about how they actually do their own work. And I'm not blaming them for it. I think this creative process of composing and orchestrating is very difficult to get your head wrapped around, especially your own self. What is it that you actually do? But there, if you stand back and you say, how do I actually go about doing this? Thinking of your orchestration as a second composition of the same piece of music is mentally, it's very freeing for you. So check out the episode. It's a really great episode. And in 2 weeks, and it's actually done. I've edited it, ready to go, but I'm trying to release these on a regular basis. William Kaplan's episode. So we talk about, he's the author of Classical Form and Analyzing Classical Form, which has been instrumental in the way I think about music, the way I teach composition. So check that episode out. I'm going to try to also get David Huron on the podcast and some other people. I've been reading their books and really into it. So let me see. Let me find another question here. Let's see. This is Nick Devlin asks, is there a reason that you use Sibelius and not many other composing programs, one better than the other? Well, I've been using Sibelius since I was about 15 years old, so I just know it really well. And I do own Dorico, and I'm learning Dorico, but it's learning a new piece of software is a major thing to deal with. Just when I got Bandit-a-Box here the other day, I hadn't used I had a copy back in 2000, 2001. It was like Bandit-a-Box 9 or something like that. And it hasn't changed all that much. So getting back into the software, I've still had to look up a bunch of things. I can't remember how to do them, but I know it well enough that I'm able to get by pretty easily. However, learning other new software, like if I were to use Logic instead of Digital Performer, it's a major undertaking to really learn everything that you can out of it. And I've spent a lot of time in Sibelius, in the manual, on the forums, looking up ideas, how to make your workflow go well. And there's nothing magical about Sibelius. It's just a tool, just like everything else. MuseScore is just a tool. Dorico, just a tool. It comes down to, have you really taken the time to learn all the intricacies of it? Read the manual. When I got into Digital Performer and I knew that I wanted to be a professional film composer, I read the entire manual. Now, did everything stick? No, but a lot of it stuck, and more importantly, I know where to look things up. So I can usually look them up very quickly, and when people ask me questions about Digital Performer, I can get back really fast. And it also means I'm somewhat of an expert on Digital Performer now. I can answer questions that a lot of times other people are not able to answer because they haven't taken the time to read the manual. So that's what I would say, is that there's no magical software out there that'll do everything for you. And the ones that do, they kind of take the fun out of it. That's why I've generally stayed away from algorithmic composing, things like that, because it's like, if a computer's doing all that work for me, then what's the point? Bandit-a-Box has the capability of generating entire pieces and melodies, and it's like, I don't need that. I don't want that. It's not what I enjoy doing about composition. So let's see. Kel asks, any tips on learning piano? I've been using Piano Marvel, but looking for other ways to learn. Well, I think getting a teacher is critical. I took a couple lessons back when I was a teenager, and I regret not really pushing myself to get a teacher on piano. But a good teacher will push you in ways that you're not able to see that you need to be pushed in that direction. I would say for me as a composer, there's some critical things that every composer should be able to do. You should be able to play any standard block chord, triad, you should be able to play those without having to think too much about it. Like if somebody says, play C sharp minor, right? Or let's say play A flat major, right? It doesn't, now maybe it takes me a second to get all my fingers on there, right? Because I'm not an amazing pianist, but I don't have to think about where my fingers are going all that much. And generally I would say that should be the case for the standard triads, seventh chords, and augmented and diminished chords. So, right? And then you just need to take the time. There we go. I played that as a minor. You just need to take the time and get these under your fingers. Now, there's a lot of books on learning piano chords, things like that. That's a critical thing. Being able to play a chord and to be able to play a melody in the right hand. Just these basic kind of skills, being able to read bass clef, those are the critical things. But I've never heard any composer tell me that they wish they didn't play piano. And I've heard a lot of composers tell me they wish they played piano better. So that's just something to keep in mind. This, in the next year or so, I plan on really diving into it, getting a piano teacher. And I do also, Arturo Sandoval, the famous trumpet player, he gives lessons here in LA, and I emailed about taking lessons. So I'm looking at taking some trumpet lessons, getting more into it, and kind of getting back into the performance side of music, which I think really connects you to music in a different way than just composing. The last thing I would recommend for piano, though, and this is something that it's just going to take like years to get really good at, unfortunately that's just the way it is sight reading as much as you can. So, sight reading hymns. You'll learn a lot about chord spacing, right? You'll see a lot of common harmonic movements. You'll see basic modulations to 5, to, if you're in minor, to 3. You'll see a lot of these core musical ideas that are used everywhere, but in a much simpler way. And then I would recommend getting these books, and actually I would recommend finding old sheet music books of these like Music for Millions, these collections of easy piano pieces, easy classical pieces, because they're actually a really great way to just practice sight reading. You just go through and yeah, you may not have the real deal. It may not be exactly what the composer wrote in the original symphony or something like that. But you'll get a little bit of it. You'll get to see some basics about the harmonic motion, the melody, where it goes. And you get a lot of material to sight read through. There's always an amazing mix in these books that I have, and maybe I'll go grab it right before the end. And these kind of things are everywhere. You go into Goodwills and secondhand stores, you'll find little sections that have sheet music. Go in and just grab the easy piano stuff. You usually have to pay $1 or $2 to get the book because nobody wants these old sheet music books. But the death of you is going to be going into IMSLP and saying, what piece should I pick now? And you scroll through 10 million pieces and you pick one and you get 2 measures in. It's like really hard. No, get a big book that's like 200 pages long of grade 2 or grade 1 piano stuff, where it's like... right? Or you're doing these kind of pieces. Right? Those are the kind of things that are in these books that you get a sampling of the, the musical world and what composers have done. And there's always these little like surprises. There was an etude, I can't remember. I think it's called the Butterfly Etude. I'm not sure. It's by Chopin, but there's this really nice arrangement of it in one of these books. And it's just this little pretty ditty to play through, and I just have a lot of fun doing it. Now, you hear the original, it's like, it's all over the place and stuff, and you'd never be able to play that. But now you can enjoy the process of playing these simplified pieces. So those are my recommendations for learning piano. Like I said, I'm not an amazing pianist, but I know enough to get by. I've got my pieces that I've got. Piano reductions are great, like you post here. Doing your own piano reductions, taking a piece that you like, writing it in a way that you can actually play it on the piano, or another great exercise, take an orchestral score, just one page, and try to play it without writing it out. Just sight read it, right? Like I was saying at the beginning, doing some ear training. Pick something, a melody or whatever, and try to tap out the melody along with a recording. There's a million ways to do this stuff, and all of it's good for you. So, okay, Charles asks, I think it was in your free course you mentioned basing chord tones off of beats 1 and 3. However, you mentioned it's possible to have chord tones on 2 and 4. So beats 1 and 3 are generally considered like the strong beats for music, and that's generally where you have, chord changes. Da, 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 right? And if you do half-note chord tone melodies, it gives you a very easy way to do it. Now, you can have You can easily do chord tones on 2 and 4. You can make the rhythms odd, right? You could do... Oh, sorry. Right there, I had my chord tones changing on 2 and 4. I would say harmonies, you should generally be, unless you're doing, like quarter note chords, you'll be changing them on 1 and 3. But ultimately, that's just a very general guideline with things. I would say the best way to get this stuff in your ear so that it's not so confusing to you is to actually just listen to music. And, if there's a theme that you really like, tap it out. Say 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4 while you're listening to it. And try to notice, when are the chords changing? Are they changing on 1? Are they changing on every measure? Are they being held for 2 measures and then changing? Are they changing on 1 and 3? Do they have some kind of big anticipation that happens on beat 4 or on beat 2? So these are the kind of things that can help clear that up a little bit, because it really comes down to connecting this with musical reality, listening to a lot of music, singing along with the music, get your voice going. Actually, that's one of the recommendations from Samuel Adler. Sing, get good at singing. Don't just be happy with the way your voice is necessarily right now, saying, oh, I can't ever sing on pitch, on key. That's an ear issue. That's not a voice issue. Now, you may not have the next American Idol voice, right? But you don't need to do it. I can find my note. Ba, 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 ba. Right? I can sing those notes without having to play them first. Ba, 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 ba. Right? These are basic skills that happen through listening, through singing along. I think in one of these other symposiums, I played the music along while I sang solos. I did that all the time as a kid. I still do it now. When one of my favorite jazz solos comes on, I'll be singing along with the solo. And what I didn't realize, and actually it's very common when I was reading through this book about how kind of old-timer jazz guys learned it, they would just learn to sing these solos, and then they would learn to play the solos. And I found that's a much easier way to go about it than to try to learn to play a new solo that you've never learned to sing through. So yeah, ultimately, just learning to feel what does beat 1 and 3 feel like versus beats 2 and 4. Ultimately, you'll know why you want to use passing notes or neighbor tones on those notes. You'll know why you want to change chords on 1, 3 most of the time versus 2 and 4. But you also know why you wouldn't. It comes down to just really feeling the music at that point. Okay. Sherlock Holmes asks, hey, John, how would you suggest we practice to apply our Western classical knowledge on vocal-based songs like Bollywood music? If you might have heard music from the movie Slumdog Millionaire. I'm not too familiar with Bollywood music, and I think it comes down to, what is the foundation for the piece that you're writing, right? And get your foundation down first. So, without listening to Slumdog Millionaire right now, I would say that whatever they built it off of, it's probably generally built off of Western sounds with Indian Bollywood music sounds added in. Although I don't know off the top of my head. It could be the other way around. But it's just like a composer like Ravel, right? He will do some really interesting harmonic movements, or Debussy will do really interesting harmonic movements. They may be using, whole tone sounds, right? They may be using weird scales, things like that. But then it seems like always there's that kind of sound that grounds you every once in a while. It's like it pulls you back into the foundation of that music. And if you think of it like that, you're building your foundation first. If you're building a house, you don't build a house and then pour the concrete on top of it. You lay your foundation first. And actually, I wrote this down the other day. I thought of it. I used to work in quality control in construction, and we had this idea called the critical path. And the critical path are the things that you need to do in order to allow everyone else to do what they need to do. So, for instance, the critical path may be, leveling the ground and then putting in the piping underneath so that you can then pour the foundation so that you can then build the house on top of it. You don't have the electrician come in before you've laid the pipes to pull in cables, because that's not part of the critical path. He can do that at another time, and it adds complication doing it at that time, right? So you would do the critical path first, and I was thinking about composing along the critical path. It's like when we write your main theme and then you write your subordinate theme in sonata form, and then you connect the two with your transition after the fact. It's like you've composed your critical path, right, your themes, and then you fill in everything else while you're going. So I think that's a really great way to approach this stuff, is to find out what's your critical path, what's your foundational material, use that, and then figure out these other systems of music, these other ideas. How can they fit in a natural way with this foundation in mind? I think you'll have a much better effect trying to mix two styles doing it that way than just haphazardly saying, oh, I'm going to use a raga right here because I want to use a raga because I've heard ragas are good to use because it sounds Indian. And then over here, I'm going to use, a sequence because sequences are good. Let us know. Pick one, right, and try to synthesize it after the fact once you've got a good foundation. So that's one way to approach it. I don't know if that is ultimately the best way to, bring in the Bollywood sound into traditional Western classical sounds. So it may be something that you have to experiment with. I do believe that Ravi Shankar wrote a concerto for sitar and orchestra, and I'm sure there's other ones as well. So you may want to listen to how have other composers done it in the past. I would look into who's doing it right now. How do they accomplish it in Slumdog Millionaire? How have great players of the sitar and great composers like Ravi Shankar gone about trying to add these instruments in? I think you'll find there's probably quite a bit out there on it already. Okay, so Gregory's asking, how do you read through and break down orchestral scores aside from listening along? Do you play at the piano and Sibelius in your head? I've done all of them. So I've written out scores in Sibelius. I've written out things by hand. I think it's out at the piano. My big thing. I wrote out a number of pages from Mahler Symphony No. 1. 4 or 5 pages, which takes forever. I mean, it really takes a long time, but you learn a lot. You end up getting really deep into the music that way. Piano reductions are great. Reducing it yourself, reducing it in the moment. I've heard of, kind of old-time conductors were really great at pulling up a score, even transpose scores, and playing really quality piano arrangements on the spot. So that's an incredible skill to have. Doing like deeper analysis of the music is always also a good thing to do. So now I know this is not a full orchestral score. I've pulled this out before. It just happens to still be on my desk. But this is Adagio for strings. This is the string quartet version. And actually pulling it up and analyzing the harmony, analyzing the phrase structure, really thinking deeply about the music. That's another great way to do it. Ultimately, however you do it, if you're getting in there, just reading along is still really beneficial. So now one process that you can do, if you're having trouble, you say, I find many orchestral lines are very hard to play in the piano. You may not be able to play, if something is written characteristically for the flute, say, it may be weird on the piano. You may not be able to have the nimbleness that they have. But going through and just reading their part can actually be very eye-opening. So ignoring the rest of the score. You'll see on IMSLP a lot of times they actually do have the individual parts. And open up a part and just read through the part and experience that score the way the player actually experiences it. A lot of times when we'd play these famous classical pieces, kind of earlier classical pieces, the trumpet part, the brass parts would be very lacking. And it's just because of the nature of the instruments that they had, like in Beethoven's time, there weren't valve trumpets. So you don't get a lot of trumpet material. But you learn something by looking at the part and seeing that this trumpet player has 48 measures of rest. Then they go ba 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 ba, along with the timpani, and then they have another 130 measures of rest. You're just like, I think there was a video online from a Schubert symphony where it's like you've got the trombones basically sitting through the entire movement, and then at one point they go blah like that, and then they put their trombones down, and that's the end of it. So yeah, getting into the actual parts and seeing how the players experience it. Mark up the score like a conductor. If you haven't been on the New York Philharmonic site, you can get a lot of old scores there. You can't necessarily download them, but you can read them. But you can look at, say, for instance, how did Bernstein, I can't remember how each of them likes the Stein or Steen at the end of their names, Leonard Bernstein. You can see how he actually marked up his scores. Look at what he looked at as, this is important stuff that I need to bring out as a conductor. Now, he may not mark up everything that he does, and he probably and most likely doesn't do that all the time. Some scores he marks up more, some scores he marks up less. The point is that you can see how great conductors and composers actually marked up their scores and thought about their music. So there's a million ways to cut it again. Just what gets you excited about that music, you should pursue that a little bit more. And what's very challenging about that music and that score reading, and pursue that more. So if you're having trouble reading 3 parts at once, really work on that. Do that more often. So let's move on. Jack asks, John, I was wondering what you think about transcribing orchestral scores as a learning aid. Yes, it's good. Do it. I mean, we've spoken about transcription a little bit at the beginning of this. I was doing jazz transcription. Anything that you can do that's ear-based, that gets you working hard, is good. And transcription is hard. There's no way around it. It sucks at the beginning if you've never done it before. I always kind of laughed when I got into my basic music theory class in college, because I had done enough of it that it wasn't extremely difficult, in these little basic ear training things where the teacher would go, and we'd have the first note. I'd be like, oh, this is super simple. And other kids would be just like, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm dying here. And it's because they haven't worked out those mental muscles in a sense. So now, if you haven't done a lot of transcribing, then I would start simpler than an orchestral score. I mean, you can start, and you can actually start simply with orchestral scores. So there's a difference. There's transcribing simple music like a single melody line, right? Right, everybody's going to be able to transcribe that one. There's another thing, though. If you pull up an orchestral score and say, I'm going to identify over these 4 measures what instruments are playing, and then it's like, okay, I hear trumpet, I hear oboe, maybe I hear violins, and I hear harp, right? Or maybe it's something different. You start off with something very small like that, and then once you do that, you say, okay, I'm going to generally figure out the harmonic movement that's going on. So a great way to do that is to figure out the bass line, right? What do the basses play? Or who's the lowest instrument? Who's the ground for all this stuff? Figure out what they're playing first. Then figure out who's the soprano line, who's the main primary element that you're thinking about, the melody. Transcribe that next. Then figure out the chords, and then from that point, you can try to figure out, okay, what are the textures? What are the individual parts? It's like, okay, well, actually, I hear flutes in 3-part harmony up here, and I hear, the basses playing staccato notes, and pick at things that you can actually hear and feel. And once you listen to something, 30, 40 times like this, you'll start to, it will really become enlightening. But I would say the next step, once you've done what you feel that you can do, okay, Jack said that transcription, he meant rewriting a score. So we'll get into that in a second. Let me just finish my thoughts here. Once you feel that you've written what you can about transcription of that piece, then look at the actual score and see what you got right and what you got wrong. It's a great learning experience. Now, I think, Jack, what you're talking about is reorchestrating a piece. And yes, that can be helpful, but I would say there's better things you can do. You can orchestrate your own music, or you can orchestrate, piano music that hasn't been orchestrated. I think you'll probably, unless you've got a major issue with the way something's been orchestrated, might as well do something new. Now, there's another sense of if somebody like Ravel has orchestrated piano pieces, like his Mother Goose Suite. He's got the piano music and he's got the orchestral music. You could reorchestrate from his piano music and then compare his orchestration with your orchestration. See what did he do? What did he do the same? What did he do different? Does yours equal or match up to his? Do you feel like you did something better than him at a certain point? So those are good exercises. Ultimately, we need to be composing probably the most. We're composers. But all these other things are really great to do, and just do kind of what you feel that is your weakness. Really focus on not what's easy, but what's hard. I know for a fact I need to spend more time ear training, transcribing, that kind of stuff. And so right now that's a lot of my focus in terms of my personal day-to-day work on what I'm doing. I've spent a lot of time over the last couple of years writing a lot of music, but I want to improve my ears, my ability to audiate, to understand music in my head, separate from reading it, separate from looking at a score or having feedback from a piano or Sibelius or whatever. So those are kind of my personal goals. Okay, let's see. MC Maru says, I have a question. I'm good at composing melodies, but I'm really bad at composing harmonically, vertically, even though I know quite some stuff about harmonic theory. Do you have some advice? Yeah, I would practice just writing chord progressions. I've in my article, let's see, it's called diatonic harmony. If you just Google diatonic harmony, I'm usually like pretty close. Unlocking the Mysteries of Diatonic Harmony. Now, I would like to sit down and probably rewrite this article because I've learned a lot more over the last couple of years. Nonetheless, it goes over the basics, and at the bottom of the article, and I'll post the link right here so everybody can click on it in the moment. And actually, let me put that right there. I don't know if that'll save at the end of this. I have my charts, my harmonic charts, right? So these charts that cover how harmony works. And what's really cool about these charts is that you can sit with the chart in front of you and kind of improvise your way through chord progressions. You can use the chart as a reference for writing chord progressions. You can transpose the chart into different keys and figure out how you're going to modulate from one to the other. These are all good exercises, and I would recommend what I have my students do in the academy is just write chord progressions, because in a sense it's its own encapsulated skill, separate from voice leading, separate from melody, separate from composing, entire pieces, separate from development, from orchestration. Being able to come up with an interesting progression is a cool skill to have. Now, that's not to say that 1-5-1 isn't totally viable as a phrase. And what I mean by that is don't discount the basics, because if you look at a lot of themes, they often are not that crazy harmonically. It's because you can really kind of get yourself into trouble and start to sound kind of like you're trying to be too fancy, too weird with your music by using these super, obscure modulations within the context of a theme. Whereas if you write your themes simple enough, you can show your prowess in other ways, especially when you're developing your music. You can show, I'm going to take this theme and then I'm going to modulate it, right? I'm going to take this theme, I'm going to chunk it up, a model sequence, and I'm going to modulate within those model sequences. I'm going to write this theme, and it's generally going to be cool, simple, basic diatonic harmony, and then at some point I'm going to put in a kind of a clustery sounding chord. Right? You can play around with those kind of ideas, but you're grounded still in simpler things that give you a lot more freedom with the way you're working. One of the cool things, and this is kind of a jazzism I've been thinking about right now, is that a 5 chord, right, can handle a lot of musical confusion on top of it. You can do. And as long as you resolve things correctly in the end, and I even had a weird resolution in the melody, sharp 4 to 3, probably would have been better as resolving upwards, because sharps normally go up, flats normally go down. It's just a lot, you got a lot to play with on basic diatonic harmony, and you can usually make things harmonically more interesting with extensions on the chords themselves. So not necessarily thinking of it outside of or like traditional harmony, but right, that's a major 9th chord, or polychords, right? That's an A over C, or F sharp over C. There's always ways to add in really interesting harmony doing that. And when you're, right, just adding a little bit of like spice on top at the end of something like that can really bring out some kind of cool harmonic feelings without getting too confusing about, like, I've modulated 4 times in the last 3 measures, that sometimes overcomplicating things is worse. Okay, let's see. Question here. Do you have you have to have a cadential at the end of each phrase, whether 8-bar phrase, 6-bar phrase. No, you don't. You don't have to have a cadence at all. I mean, you can leave things hanging. You can, no. The answer is no. You don't have to cadence. Now, traditional classical form, if you're trying to emulate the sound of classical composers, then generally at the ends of themes and phrases you have cadences, but often cadences are abandoned. Cadences are expanded in different ways. You'll modulate through to different keys in those cadences. So I would think about cadences as important structural elements in your music, and they do give closure, right? Don't just think of the cadence as I have to have a cadence here because that's what we're told to do. Think of it as, when in fact do you want closure, and how are you going to achieve that closure? You don't have to have a cadence to have closure, right? If I'm going, all I did there was 1 4 1, right? But I got closure through another way. Or I could do it like this. I achieve closure through kind of a downward, melodic thing in the bass, a very rich, chord at the end there. That's closure. Another way to get closure, though, a big cadence. Cadences bring kind of tonal, harmonic, melodic closure a lot of times. So just think about it structurally. Do you want to keep things open, or do you want to close them down? How much do you want to close them down? Do you want to really close them down harmonically? Because that's when you get the... right? That's a very grand, huge, big, ba, 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 right? Big cadence. Whereas if you're just... right, a little light, whatever, you're not going to get the same amount of closure from that. So yeah, cadences equal closure. The important thing is the closure, not so much the cadence, but what are you trying to achieve at the end of your theme? Do you want to violate the expectations that your listeners are going to have on your piece? Then, yeah, don't end your main theme in a cadence, because that's going to violate some expectations people have about main themes. If you're doing film scoring, a lot of times you absolutely avoid cadences, because a cadence can make the scene prematurely feel like it's coming to an end. when really the scene may go on for another 3 or 4 minutes. Or even if it gets to the end of the scene, it can give closure to a feeling that you want to leave that feeling open. So you may end on a completely foreign note to that harmony, to that diatonic scale, or whatever system of thinking that you're using for the music at the time. And that's perfectly okay, perfectly acceptable, because the goal of the music at that point is different. So yeah, just what are you trying to achieve in music, and is the cadence what you need at that point? Okay, so we are coming up on an hour and a half here soon. If I didn't get to your question, you can rewrite it in at the bottom here if I didn't answer it for a second. Do a second pitch for artofcomposing.com. If you want to learn to compose, definitely check out Music Composition, Music 101 and 201. 101's for the foundation, 201 development. I've gone over this a lot before, but I believe that my courses are chock full of really valuable information for a lot of composers. And it's a lot of stuff. It's not just, I didn't try to just sit down and say, I'm going to teach everybody to compose. It was years of me discovering things that I felt had never been said to me before, that I really only got these through, hard-fought practical experience and reading a lot of really good music theory. And yes, there is a lot of really good music theory out there, but sometimes it's hard to find. Books like Classical Form, Analyzing Classical Form, Voice Leading by David Huron, A Geometry of Music by Dmitry Tomashko. These are really, amazing books that these music theorists have written. And often, if you spend the time to get into them, it'll create all sorts of insights. And that's what I did. I spent the time. I went into these. I experimented with my own composing techniques. I talked to composers. I tried to really learn as much as I could, and that's what I put into the courses. So check them out, artofcomposing.com, and you can sign up for the free course. So the books that I'm talking about, actually, I just created. Let's see. A new page. So MC Maru is asking about those books. I need to add this to my list of resources here. But I created a reading list for the books that I personally have felt made the biggest impact. Let's see. Let me find the page real quick here, and I'll post the link. Okay. Sorry, I made the URL extremely long for some reason. I need to make a little short one. But this is my reading list. So on the reading list, in fact, that's my banded box window. I'm going to switch this to the Chrome. So on my reading list here, I've got Classical Form. And I've got Analyzing Classical Form, because that's William Kaplan's latest book. So I would stick with that one, because he has developed some ideas, clarified some things. I liked Classical Form the way it was beforehand, but I really like Analyzing Classical Form. He actually does have composition exercises for you in there as well as a lot of. He goes in a lot more depth about analyzing versus just using the stuff to compose, because for me the mental process of analyzing versus composition is very different. I've got Voice Leading by David Huron. It's kind of like my latest thing that I'm just really excited about. So check it out. The Fundamentals of Musical Composition is on here. And what's interesting about this book is that it is what William Kaplan really based a lot of his ideas about form from. So Arnold Schoenberg was kind of the guy that came up with some of these terms, like the sentence. Sentence hadn't really been used prior to him. The ideas about form are much more developed in William Kaplan's book. However, this is written for composers. This is written after Schoenberg was teaching at UCLA for a long time, teaching beginner composers, and he wanted to find a way to be able to explain the stuff to them simply. And I base a lot of my ideas off of this book as well. Modal Counterpoint by Peter Schubert, another really good counterpoint book. There's a lot of counterpoint books, but this one in particular was very effective the way he has you go through the exercises. So I would definitely check it out. Effectively, he shows you that most counterpoint is a series of two notes that you have to compose above or below on, and you can either compose note to note, 2 notes at a time or 4 notes at a time. He goes in all those. 20th Century Harmony, if you're looking for resources in terms of just new interesting ways to use harmony that are not diatonic, this is about the best book that I know of right now. I think there's probably some other ones out there, but it's more like an index of harmony, or like an encyclopedia of different techniques. But it's very human the way he does. He thinks of it as a composer and less as a theorist. Geometry of Music is just a really fascinating book. He goes through and explains how diatonic harmony works, and he gives you these really cool tools. It's where I originally got my harmony chart ideas from. I've developed other things on my harmony chart, so my latest one's very different from the original one he's got in the book. But the basics of how diatonic harmony works, he basically went in there and he did a corpus study of Bach and Mozart, and what is the most likely highest percentage of one chord leading to the other, and was able to come up with a very simple way to conceptualize diatonic harmony. So these I've got a couple more. Creative Orchestration by George Frederick Mackay. Another one of these orchestration books that's very different from all the others. He actually has some principles of orchestration. And Henry Brandt's book is the best book that I've seen that really talks about putting different kinds of instruments together to get the best kind of balance within your orchestration. So those are 2 really great books. Behind Bars by Elaine Gould is the book on music notation. I use it all the time when I'm preparing scores. A lot of this stuff, you just can't remember all of it. There's just so much information. So having a good reference on notation is critical. I highly recommend Behind Bars. And then, of course, The Study of Orchestration by Samuel Adler. It's a great reference book for orchestration. Another one of these things, like, most people will never take the time to read the book from front to back. I sat down, I read the whole book, and you learn a lot. Did I remember everything? No, I don't remember everything. But I remember a lot, and I remember where to look it up when I need it. And in my own personal copy, I don't have the latest edition. I still got, version 3, which for the most part is really good. But I would say that, take notes in your books. Let me grab mine. I try to talk the talk and walk the walk here. If you see, I am, I've got my books all, these are like my core books here. I've got them all ready to go. So yeah. And, what I wanted to show you, though, out of my orchestration book is, if I can find an example here. Let me flip to the horns. You'll see that on these, switch camera here. I take a lot of notes. I highlight, I write things down as best as I can. I try to take notes about where things are gonna. Well, let's just listen to a few of my notes here on the horn, because I think this will be interesting to see. Large leaps are difficult for all brass, especially double tonguing them. These are just little, tidbits that you pick up over time. If you get a good reference orchestration book like, The Study of Orchestration, you have a place to put them all in there. So, let's see. Don't begin in any extreme range, right? These are stuff that it's like most people know, but you got to write them down. Horn and tuba, fill the room and float over everything. That's just like kind of a thing that I wrote down. I don't know who told that to me or if I just noticed when I was listening. But it's just something to keep in mind. Have a good place to write all this stuff down. Here's my Elaine Gould book. Absolutely critical for anybody preparing orchestral scores. There's just so much in here. You can never really remember all of it. So yeah, check out the reading list, because these are books. A lot of people put up reading lists, and I think half the time they haven't actually read the books. These are all books that I've pretty much read cover to cover, all of them. And I haven't read Behind Bars cover to cover. I use that mostly as a reference book. But for the most part, I've read all of these, and I can highly recommend it. I can say that they've made a big impact on the way I compose. So let me double check here any other Any other questions? Let's see. Greg Moore is asking, how do you get the most out of Henry Brandt's book that it's under the lamp behind you? It has lots of orchestration with sounds to hear. So how do you learn these orchestral colors? In a sense, Henry Brandt's book it's got a lot of really practical information in there, and you kind of have to just go through step by step. But the core of what he's talking about is understanding the ranges of the instruments, how the instruments compare to each other, and how to make them blend best in kind of basic situations, so that in more complex situations you got a basic idea of how it's going to work. So he splits it up into, I think it's like 12 different categories of sounds. He's got like a couple wind sounds, winds 1, 2, 3, and 4, which is effectively the flute sound, the oboe sound, the open trumpet, and the open horn sound, right? And he shows you the basics of it. You've got two competing different timbres. You have to be very careful about how you blend those together. Now, will you necessarily be able to hear exactly what that's going to sound like in your head? Maybe, maybe not. It depends on your experience with those instruments. Like right now, I could hear what a chord is going to sound like if it's two muted trumpets below two oboes, right? And the muted trumpets are playing maybe mezzo piano, and the oboes are playing mezzo forte or forte. I can generally imagine what that's going to sound like. Now, could I imagine what those are going to sound like all playing, complicated lines that move in harmony or move in parallel motion with each other? Probably not 100% accurately, but I don't need that to know generally it's going to work. He's got a term for that. I can't think of it off the top of my head. It's like it's like contact points or something like that. It's the point at which those two timbres meet, right? And those are the danger points. That's where you're going to have less blending, where you have a lot of those contact points between timbres. So effectively, though, with all of these books, the way you get the most out of them, at least for me, is to do like a general read-through, get an overview of everything, and then to sit down and get into what actually confuses you or what you feel you need to internalize the most. So when I originally went through William Kaplan's book, I remember the morning that I read it for the first day, and I was like, oh, it's I understand. Finally, I understand. Like it made so much sense to my brain, the way he conceptualizes form and the way he connects it to time, temporality, beginning, middle, and end. It all made a lot of sense. But then I had to sit down and reread everything and listen to the examples, play them at the piano, find recordings of them. You can, in a sense, you can get a lot done with sample libraries. You can understand, within reason, what an oboe and a trumpet are going to sound like playing together. Are you going to understand all the intricacies of how those players approach that in a performance? No, you're not, until you actually write music, get it in front of players, listen to it, figure out what went wrong, and then readjust and move on from there. That's the only way to really, truly lock all this in, is to actually do it. So ultimately, books are just information that people are passing on to you, and it doesn't become real, it doesn't become your own until you sit down and do it yourself. I can tell you all day long about themes, right? It's never going to really make sense until you sit down and you write a theme, until you write a sentence and you write a period and you try to add those loosening techniques that we talked about at the beginning, interpolation, expansion, extension. Once you sit down and actually do it, it makes more sense. So, and I try to push people to say, find real players, learn to play instruments yourselves, learn places that you can make this real. I've had scores played by orchestras that it just feels amazing when you actually get to hear your music played by real players. There's just nothing like it. It's just really an amazing feeling. So let's see. Tom asks, what is neo-modality and neo-tonality? I don't really know. I mean, those are kind of like fuzzy words that it sounds like it can mean something specific or it can mean something general. If somebody is calling themselves a neo-tonality composer, then whatever definition they're using, fine. But you'll start to see that definitions of these kind of things, like what is tonality, can start to get very fuzzy and cause a lot of kind of musical infighting between people. So I wouldn't necessarily get wrapped around a term like, neoclassical or neomodality or neotonality. Just write the kind of music that you feel you want to be writing. Find the composers that you like the way they write and learn from them. And then if you really want a good definition, probably just go to Wikipedia. I mean, if I just type in neotonality, let's see, there is an article on neotonality. And it says it's an inclusive term referring to musical compositions of the 20th century in which the tonality of the common practice period is replaced by one or several non-traditional tonal conceptions such as tonal assertion or contrapuntal motion around a central chord. Sounds pretty fuzzy to me. Sounds like neotonality can mean just about anything that's not like pure serialism, and you're writing now instead of writing 100 years ago. So yeah, I would not get wrapped around those kind of things. Let's see, is it worth spending years and years studying harmony, counterpoint, fugue, and orchestration in a music school? That's a very personal question. There's a lot of factors that go into that. I would say that if you are planning on spending $100,000 and you think that at the end of that you're going to have an amazing composing career, that's not necessarily going to happen. There's a lot of benefits to going to school, right? You're around a lot of players, you're around other composers, you've got teachers who are dedicated to you, you've got structure in the way you're learning. There's a lot of downsides. It's time spent doing other things. Obviously, most schools, music schools, also have you do general education requirements. You may not want to be focusing on that right now. It costs a lot of money. Even state schools, you're looking anywhere from $10,000 to $20,000 a year in state tuition. Or wherever you are. I mean, you could be in another country and it could be kind of a different situation. However, just look at the pros and cons. Actually, spend the time, make a list of what's good about it, what's bad about it, what are your goals. Talk to people who are doing what you want to do right now and ask them just like you're asking me. I'm not the end-all be-all of information. I don't know everything that's ever been or ever will be or anything like that. So, I've got my take on it. Personally, I went to college, right? But I had a full scholarship. I started as a music major and I switched to history. So I didn't even finish my music degree. And did I study harmony, counterpoint, fugue, and orchestration in college? Actually, I did not. I studied harmony in college. I never had a composition teacher in college. The composition teacher who was like the main composition teacher, in fact, the only one that I know of that called himself the composition teacher, went on sabbatical my freshman year. So I never even got to meet the guy. So it was like kind of frustrated with all of it. And ultimately, I think personally, my journey is what it is. I feel that I developed in other ways that are benefiting me probably more so than if I had just stuck with music as an idea in school. I learned to write. I learned to read really well in my history major, right? Because we have to write a lot of papers and we have to read a lot of books. Which, yeah, sometimes I didn't read all the books. Okay, I wasn't the greatest history student. Nonetheless, I did have to write a lot, and that served me really well. I mean, obviously, in art of composing, I have to write a lot. I write articles, I write scripts, I write, things out for my podcast. So that served me well. And my time in the Army, I could have gotten out of college and really pursued music as a thing. My time in the Army taught me all sorts of other skills that I see a lot of times are lacking in the entertainment world. And it's not necessarily skills of music. It's skills of, being willing to put up with the BS of just day-to-day existence in Hollywood. We had this phrase in the Army. We say, embrace the suck, right? Your life is about to suck right now, and that's just the way it is. You need to embrace it because that's what we do, right? And a lot of times in Hollywood, in music in general, it's the same way, but people aren't willing to come out and say it, right? If you want to write a piece for orchestra, you want to write whatever, it's going to be a lot of work and you're going to get cramped, sitting at your computer or writing by hand. You're going to feel like you have no ideas. You need to embrace the suck there, right? You need to just say, okay, this is going to be hard work. I'm going to grow from it. I am going to enjoy parts of it, and other parts are just going to be boring and slow and painful. Eventually, you're going to get to the end of that, though, and you're going to be able to look back and say, you know what I created there is good. I learned a lot, and I actually did enjoy it after the fact. So to get back to your question about music school, you can learn a lot about those subjects without going to school, right? You can learn a lot about those subjects by going to school. So ultimately, if you want to learn, just start learning those things, right? And then figure out all those other aspects of it. How important is the money to you? Can you get a full scholarship? Who are you going to be studying with? I would say probably the most important thing with picking a school is not the name of the school, not the prestige of the program. It's who are you actually going to be studying with? Do you gel with that teacher, right? Are their goals for you similar in the right direction, or have you talked about those goals? There's no need to be coy about this stuff. You need to go to those teachers, right? If I don't know if you're in high school right now or if you're thinking about going back to college, wherever you're thinking about going, you need to start emailing those teachers. You need to write the heads of the departments, ask them these questions. What will I learn at this school? How will I be taught? What are your goals for your students? One of the things where I went to school, I went to Furman University. It was more of a player-focused school, which I didn't know any of this at the time, but it was focused on playing. I wasn't focused on playing. I was focused on theory. I really loved theory, and I loved composing as a teenager, and none of that was really nurtured there. The things that I did like to play were jazz. They didn't have a jazz teacher when I showed up. I didn't know that. They hired one like the next year, and I got to know him, and I liked having lessons with him. But that was right around the time when I switched to history for a number of reasons, which actually, if you listen to my it was one of my episodes on the Mastery podcast. It was like the third in the series on Mastery. I go into that a little bit, but just looking back on how I would approach it and how I would tell my own kids to approach this and say, what do you hope to get out of this? And go start talking to those teachers and find out, are you going to get that out of it? Is that teacher going to push you to say, there's no money in that. You don't want to do that. What you really need to do is you need to practice this orchestral literature and practice these Mozart transcriptions for trumpet. And then, that's what you need to be spending on most of the time. Well, that didn't work for me. That's not what I wanted to do. And ultimately, I ended up not doing that. So that caused a lot of tension in my life at the time. Whereas, looking at it now, and actually, I applied to USC. I didn't get in, which I think part of it is the style of music that I was composing and submitting. But also part of it was my GPA for my undergrad wasn't that great, and I think that really affected me getting into USC. But I applied to USC, one, because it's local, but two, some of the composers there, I don't just like their music. I really love their music. Like Morten Lauridsen, if you haven't listened to his choral music, I don't really like a lot of choral music. I find a lot of choral music just not my taste. However, when I heard his pieces, I stopped. I listened to them for a week straight. I couldn't get enough of it. I was like, I really love this composer and what he does. I would love to study under him. So really take a look at what your goals are musically, and don't be afraid for a teacher who's going to put you outside of your comfort zone. Obviously, I want teachers who are going to challenge my views and things like that. But ultimately, you've got a general direction. I want to be a composer. Well, don't go to a school that's going to be 100% focused on jazz players, right? If you go to University of North Texas and your goal isn't somewhat related to jazz, I'm not saying that that's all they do. Obviously, they've got other things, but that's what that school's known for, and you're going to get a lot of great teachers who are in that route, and that's probably going to be a focus. Whereas if you really want to get into modern composing, and you want to be on Q2 music, then try to go to Juilliard, right? That's where you're going to develop there. If you really want to get into kind of film composing, go to UCLA Extension or go to USC, the SMP TV program. These, you got to know why you're going to that specific school, who you're going to be studying at, what's your goal. So I suppose I get off my soapbox. College is just an interesting thing. Ashton says, any school that looks at your GPA over your skills isn't worth going to. I would say, though, that getting into college isn't just up to one person. It's not always up to just the teacher in charge of what you want. I would say a big part of it is you've got to meet the standards that school wants, right? Now, there's probably 10 reasons or 20 reasons why I didn't get in. And I'm okay with that, right? I didn't meet what they needed, and I readjusted, and I moved in a different direction. And ultimately, what I've come to realize over the last year is probably would have been too much of a stretch with 3 kids right now, and one of them's just about to turn 3, the other one's 8 months old. That's a lot of work, and for me to be going back and forth to school is probably, for another 2 years is probably not the greatest thing for me at this time. So ultimately, I look at it and say, this is a blessing that I didn't get in right now. And also, nothing stops me from really going down, meeting all those teachers and saying, I want to have lessons with you separate from school, and I'm willing to pay more than what you maybe get for my time at the school. So, but yeah, there's more to everything than just GPA. So, yeah. And then Mario says he's a teenager. I love composing and harmony, but the theoretical music subjects last more than 10 years. It's going to last your whole life. You're going to be unlocking secrets to music your whole life. There's going to be things that are still interesting. I mean, look at these composers that compose up to the end. Bach, Beethoven, Mozart, Schubert. They were all still going strong, still learning all sorts of things. In the interview with Samuel Adler, he's still writing music. Now, he's retired for the most part from teaching at universities, but he said he's still got a lot of music to write, and he's doing traveling. We're all still learning. You're going to be learning your whole life. So don't think of it as, I finally get to go to college and learn everything there is about music and composing. Think of it as, I finally get to really start this journey in a proper way with somebody who can guide me. So let's see. Growling Goomba says he's got a question up above, but let's see. I recently arranged One Winged Angel from Final Fantasy 17 for my high school symphonic band and had a great time doing it. I want to learn to compose. With the books you talk about start at the basics. Some of the books that I have on there don't really start at the basics. I mean, if you wanted to start with a book too, I would look at the Fundamentals of Musical Composition by Arnold Schoenberg, but he doesn't go into necessarily all the details. Like, if you're already arranging for your symphonic band, it sounds like you know how to read music, you understand the basics of harmony and melody and stuff. I would highly recommend signing up for my free course because it's free. It's also just on YouTube. If you just go to YouTube and type in how to compose music, you'll probably find it. Or, if you're watching this, you're on my YouTube channel. So just go to my channel. You'll find my playlist. The 101 course obviously goes through a lot of those fundamental basic stuffs. So, I went through Harmony and Voice Leading by Aldwell and Schachter. I don't have it up on my reading list because it can be very dry and take a long time to go through. And I feel like the voice leading book by David Huron really clears up a lot of these things that were confusing, like why are parallel fifths and parallel octaves bad? Well, there's this thing called harmonic fusion that happens between an octave where your brain can't actually perceive the octave. It just perceives one musical object as this note with a fundamental and a really strong harmonic maybe at the octave, but it doesn't perceive it as two different notes. And when they move in parallel, it just perceives it as one note being moved in parallel. So you actually lose the separation of parts. So that's why we avoid those. Nonetheless, I'm getting off topic here. I would look at Fundamentals of Musical Composition by Arnold Schoenberg, sign up for my free course, read my articles. I've posted a lot of stuff on my site over the last 5 years that I feel are really actually useful for composers to get into. So that's what I would do. Yeah. Okay. Well, I think we're done. It's 12:50, so we've been at this for quite a while. In fact, an hour and 52 minutes. So this is kind of a longer one, and I've got other stuff to do today. It's a nice, beautiful Saturday. We had some rain last night in LA, so yeah, that's always good. But as usual, next week's symposium is going to be a Friday evening around 5 PST, Pacific Standard Time. So tune in, and yeah, email me with suggestions. I want to turn this into almost more of a TV show kind of thing, and I like the question and answers. I think that's important for people. But if you got ideas, if you got things that you want me to try out, maybe I could pre-analyze a piece. We do that, or I'm thinking about bringing on some guests, maybe in the local area that are friends of mine, come chat, things like that. Maybe we'll sit on the couch behind me and I don't know, chat about music, whatever we do. So until next time, keep composing, keep learning, And yeah, send me your questions. So I'll see everybody later.